Welcome back to the Calm Mind channel. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects us all, yet remains somewhat of a mystery: motivation. Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to get started on that project, or why you can't seem to focus on studying for that upcoming exam? Well, the answer might be in your brain, specifically with a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine, often referred to as the pleasure molecule, plays a significant role in our motivation to do things we desire. It's what gets us up in the morning, what drives us to achieve our goals, and what makes us feel good when we do. But what happens when this system gets out of balance? In today's digital society, we're constantly bombarded with high dopamine activities, from scrolling through social media to playing video games. This can lead to a flood of dopamine in our brains, which might sound great, but can actually lead to addictive behaviors and a lack of motivation for more productive tasks. So, join us as we explore the fascinating world of dopamine, how it influences our motivation, and what we can do to manage it for a more productive and fulfilling life. Let's get started. Understanding dopamine. So, what exactly is dopamine? Dopamine is a type of neurotransmitter, which is a fancy way of saying it's a chemical messenger in your brain. Dopamine is produced in several areas of the brain, including the substantia nigra and the ventral tegmental area. It's then released by neurons to send signals to other neurons. One of the main roles of dopamine is to send signals related to pleasure and reward. When you do something enjoyable, your brain releases dopamine. This gives you a feeling of pleasure and reinforces the action, making you want to do it again. This is where the motivation part comes in. Dopamine doesn't just respond to rewards, but it also helps us to seek them out. It's what drives us to work towards our goals, to strive for success, and to persist in the face of challenges. But dopamine isn't just about pleasure and reward. It's also involved in memory, learning, mood, sleep, and even movement. So, it's a pretty important player in our brain's functioning. But what happens when our dopamine system gets hijacked by high dopamine activities? Let's find out. Dopamine Experiments. To understand the power of dopamine, let's take a look at some fascinating experiments conducted with rats. In these experiments, scientists implanted electrodes into the brains of rats, specifically targeting the areas where dopamine is produced. The rats could press a lever to stimulate these areas, effectively giving themselves a dopamine boost. And guess what? The rats loved it. They pressed the lever over and over again, to the point of ignoring food and sleep. This shows just how powerful the desire for dopamine can be. But what happened when the scientists blocked the release of dopamine? The rats lost all motivation. They became lethargic, showing no interest in activities they previously enjoyed. This stark contrast demonstrates the crucial role dopamine plays in motivation and desire. Now, we're not rats, but our brains work in similar ways. Just like these rats, we can become hooked on activities that give us a dopamine rush, and lose motivation for tasks that don't. This brings us to the concept of high dopamine behaviors, which we'll explore next. Dopamine and brain priorities. Our brains are incredibly complex, and they're constantly making decisions about what to prioritize. And guess what plays a big role in that decision-making process? You guessed it, dopamine. Our brain develops priorities based on how much dopamine it expects to receive from an activity. If an activity has previously led to a big dopamine release, the brain will prioritize it because it anticipates a similar reward in the future. For example, if playing a video game has given you a big dopamine rush in the past, your brain will prioritize playing that game over, say, studying for an exam, which might not give an immediate dopamine reward. This is why it can be so hard to motivate ourselves to do difficult tasks. Our brains are wired to seek out the biggest dopamine reward, and often, that's not the task that's most beneficial for us in the long run. Understanding this can help us make better decisions and find ways to motivate ourselves to do the hard tasks. But first, we need to understand what these high dopamine behaviors are and how they're affecting our brains. High dopamine behaviors. So, what are these high dopamine behaviors we've been talking about? Well, they're activities that give us a big dopamine rush, often immediately and with little effort. Playing video games, scrolling through social media, watching internet pornography, these are all examples of high dopamine behaviors. They provide instant gratification and a big dopamine release, which makes them highly addictive. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with these activities. The problem arises when they start to take over our lives, when we start to prioritize them over more productive tasks because of the dopamine rush they provide. In our digital society, these high dopamine behaviors are everywhere, and it's easier than ever to fall into their trap. But what does this constant dopamine flood do to our brains? Let's find out in the next section. Dopamine in the digital society. In today's digital society, we're surrounded by a plethora of devices and platforms designed to capture our attention and keep us engaged. Social media feeds that never end, video games with captivating graphics and compelling narratives, streaming services offering endless hours of entertainment, all of these are high dopamine activities. These platforms are designed to be addictive, to give us a quick and easy dopamine rush. Every like, share, comment, or level up triggers a release of dopamine, reinforcing the behavior and making us want to repeat it. And with these devices always at our fingertips, it's easier than ever to fall into a cycle of constant dopamine stimulation. We're essentially flooding our brains with unnaturally high amounts of dopamine on a daily basis. This constant dopamine flood can have serious consequences, leading to addictive behaviors and a lack of motivation for more productive tasks. But by understanding how this process works, we can take steps to manage our dopamine levels and regain control over our motivation and productivity. Let's explore the consequences of high dopamine levels in the next section. Consequences of high dopamine levels. So, we've talked about how our brains are constantly seeking out dopamine rewards, and how high dopamine behaviors can hijack this system. But what are the consequences of this constant dopamine flood? When we're constantly engaging in high dopamine activities, our brains get used to this high level of stimulation. Over time, this can lead to a number of problems. Firstly, it can lead to addictive behaviors. Just like the rats in the experiment we talked about earlier, we can become hooked on the dopamine rush from these activities, and find it hard to stop. Secondly, it can lead to a lack of motivation for more productive tasks. Remember how our brains prioritize activities based on expected dopamine rewards? Well, if we're constantly getting a big dopamine rush from high dopamine behaviors, our brains might start to see more difficult tasks as not worth the effort. This can make it hard to motivate ourselves to study, work on a project, or do anything that doesn't provide an immediate dopamine reward. Conclusion. We've taken quite a journey today, exploring the fascinating world of dopamine and its powerful influence on our motivation and behaviors. We've learned about the role of dopamine as a neurotransmitter, how it drives our desires and motivation, and how it influences our brain's priorities. We've seen how high dopamine behaviors, prevalent in our digital society, can flood our brains with dopamine, leading to addictive behaviors and a lack of motivation for more productive tasks. But knowledge is power. By understanding how dopamine works, we can start to make better decisions, find ways to motivate ourselves to do the hard tasks, and manage our dopamine levels for a more balanced and fulfilling life. Remember, it's not about completely avoiding high dopamine activities, but rather about finding a balance and not letting them take over our lives. So, the next time you find yourself reaching for your phone to scroll through social media, take a moment to consider what's really driving that behavior. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of dopamine. We hope you found it as fascinating as we have, and that it helps you on your path to a more motivated and productive life. Until next time, stay curious.